Welcome to a special edition of Mind Blowers. Today we're going to talk about Donald Trump, who has been in office on the 30th for 100 days. And we're going to evaluate how he has done and even grade him from 0 to 10 on each of the points. So some of the major points will be how has he been doing on stopping the Ukraine war, how has he been doing with the much hated tariffs and so on. But first, I have a critical question for you, Lars. And of course, we have Lars Tvede in the studio, who is going to talk about this. And so first, the big question, Lars. So are you a big Trump fan yourself?
I have always thought that his personality is a problem.
Kissing my ass. They are dying to make a deal. Please, sir, make a deal. I'll do anything, sir.
But I have my views are nuanced. So first of all, I think it's important to understand that MAGA, which is Make America Great Again, is a public movement, and it's designed to be and managed to be a popular movement. It's really populist. And populist is not necessarily a bad word. It can be a bad word, but it can also be a good word. The Republican Party has largely become a workers' party. Before that, it was neocon, a very much an upper class academic party. So there's been a very big transition there. Whereas the Democrats is a party mainly for people who live from the public sector, who have high education and who are women. So I have not seen any statistics for highly educated women working in the public sector, but I would think they were very, very much leaning Democratic. It's a funny animal, this administration, because if you look at his administration, the team below him, especially in the key economic posts, they are highly professional, highly skilled. Besant is, in my opinion, a dream finance minister, as we would call in Europe. He's been head of research for George Soros when he ran the most successful hedge fund in the world. He's built up his own fund. He's become a dollar billionaire, completely self-made. Howard Lutnick has been running a global, what you would call the traders trading company, the central company that the other financial institutions would typically work through, with offices in 60 countries, 12,000 employees, really at the center of the global financial system. He has a very, very deep insight in general economics and finance, very, very smart, also a people person. Elon Musk is arguably the best entrepreneur in the world since World War II, unless there's somebody in China that I don't know about. Is also on and off the richest person in the world, completely self-made, arrived with not a penny. And there are many others that are absolutely exceptional. But they come from business, from entrepreneurship, especially. J.D. Vance, the vice president, has been running a venture capital fund and has been one of the smartest people talking about technology and venture. The guy that put in charge of AI and blockchain is David Sachs, who has been chief operating officer at PayPal, where he was an entrepreneur and has been a venture capitalist also. So here you have an administration that consists at the top, at the leading positions, largely of very successful business people. So one thing that I often hear is that Elon Musk is stupid, that Donald Trump is stupid, and so on. I think they're not stupid. They're really, really smart in each their way.
Yeah, so I mean, let me just clarify my own opinion as well. So I'm definitely not a Trumpist. I was rooting for Biden, both on the previous election and this one. But then when I saw what condition he was in, I actually wanted Kamala Harris to take over. I had a nice impression of her from some earlier videos, but I was hugely disappointed in her campaigning. So in the end, I actually didn't know who I was hoping for. But what I do think, and what I do want to address, is that I think the media treatment of Trump and this administration and Musk, I think it's extremely one-sided. I think they do their best to try to make him look chaotic, irrational, downright insane, and they're picking his worst moments, and they're presenting it like there's no strategy at all, which I also find quite ridiculous. So I think it's important to be a counterweight to that and look at what could be the strategy and what could be going well and where they might be in trouble.
Yeah, so on what you see, I think it's largely grossly misrepresented, especially in established media, because when you go on social media, I think it's more balanced, also more rough. But just an example, I don't know if you noticed that, but there was this funeral for the former Pope, and you have these pictures in the St. Peter's Church, and then Donald Trump has a blue suit, and next to him are sitting a few people dressed in black, and then people say, what a lack of respect. Wasn't there something about that he was complaining that Zelensky didn't know how to dress? He shows up in a blue suit. Though, so first of all, it wasn't Donald Trump who was complaining about Zelensky's clothing when Zelensky was in the White House. It was a journalist who asked about it. So it got nothing to do with Donald Trump. But second, if you zoom out, you see lots and lots of blue suits. So it was full of men with blue suits. So what they do is they have that photo, and then they cut out the part where you see him in a blue suit next to a few people in black, and then they completely distort what is going on. And I see that many, many times, but I also see the way you represent what he's actually trying to do or what the team is trying to do completely misunderstood. For instance, when they come out, and I know we'll get back to that, but what they came up with this very rough trade tariffs, and where the market went into panic, and everybody was saying that this was the start of trade war and so on. I already before that, but especially after, I kept saying that the way he acts is that he comes out with a very, very rough negotiation starting point, and that's in negotiation tactics is called throwing an anchor. And then it's up to the counterpart in a negotiation to move that anchor, but then they have to sacrifice something to move that anchor. That's just how Donald Trump always operates. And I saw one of the major American investment banks. They simply put the number from his this big table that he showed into an economic model, ran it, and then said inflation would peak at 7.5% in Q3, I think. And I thought that's really odd to do, because you cannot realistically expect that we will end at the numbers that he opens the discussion will end at much, much lower numbers. So what they could say is that here's different scenarios. The worst case scenario is what he actually opened the negotiation with. Best case is that we get, on average, lower tariffs in the world, and central case is somewhere between those. So I see so much that I think is grossly misrepresenting what goes on. And because of that, I kind of looked forward to having this talk that we are going to have now.
Yes, so we're going through, I think it's roughly 15 points that are important for their administration that we're going to try to rate them on. So the first one is illegal immigration, so border control and security. So let's do kind of a quick summary of what has happened there, and then try to rate them from 0 to 10, with 0 being a disaster and 10 being a success.
Oh, shall I rate it? Okay, I'll say that's a 10. First of all, it's one of the two things that were top of my mind among American population. and was also very big among Democrats. They wanted to control immigration. It's not that they're against immigration, but they want it legal. They want a legal process for it. And it was a complete mess during the Biden administration, and has been on and off in horrible condition for many, many years during many presidencies. It's completely dysfunctional in Europe now still, but he did manage it within a very, very short time to reduce it by more than 95%. So it's a 10.
It's a 10. Okay, so a second one is that he promised to stop the Ukraine war. I think he said he will do it within 24 hours. So not quite there yet, but how do you think he's doing on it?
Yeah, I think this is an example of knowing how Donald Trump talks. When he said he would close it within 24 hours, I don't think any sane person thought that he would do that. But he did start making an effort even quite a long time before he became president, before the 20th of January. He's having difficulties with it. And first he tried to shake down Zelensky, get an understanding with him, and then based on that move to Russia and then get an understanding with Putin. I think it's important to understand what he wants to achieve. So first of all, he wants to stop the war, stop this conflict. Basically, he would like to do everything he can to stop all conflicts in the world, and then focus on the power struggle with China. So the second thing is, from a geopolitical point of view, he wants to wrestle Russia somewhat away from China. He thinks that would be better from a poor Machiavellian practical policy point of view, so that Russia would be more integrated with the Western world and less allied with China. So because of this, he assumes that there's no realistic chance whatsoever that Ukraine can gain back all the territories, and probably any of the territories that they have lost, unless NATO, joins the war, which NATO doesn't want to do. So there are lots of people saying that they should never give away anything. But from a realistic point of view, what is their strategy? How will they have? Do they want the war to keep on going forever, with the risk also that Russia keeps eating more and more? Or do they want NATO to really join the war, or what? So if there's no alternative, then you have to look at what is doable right now. So the point of view is that you want to freeze the situation pretty much where it is, but then ensure that he cannot attack Ukraine again, and that means that Ukraine really the remaining part of Ukraine, which is about 80%, gets well integrated with the West, and then the 20% that Russia has taken gets integrated into Russia, which I would say in the long run perhaps is not such a bad solution for the rest of Ukraine, because then they really get integrated with the West. But it's important to understand there's the dual objectives. One is to stop the war. No, the three are stop the war, get the Western Ukraine integrated and secured by the West, and then get Russia away from China. And that means to normalize the economic relationship, even having good economic relationship with Russia. And that's also if Russia is playing on both sides, which you can say India is doing the same, Turkey is doing the same, then at least that means that China doesn't have Russia as a vassal state anymore, which is pretty much the situation right now. So he has not succeeded. He's giving it a try, and I would say to anybody who is critical of that is that who else has tried to solve it? The EU has not done anything. China has not done anything. India has not done anything. Nobody has made any serious effort to solve this. So I don't know. Do you know this term, the man in arena? It's a very famous essay about the ones who go out down in the arena and try to fight it out. They often fail, but at least they try. And it's important to respect the people who try to solve a problem, even if they get hurt in the process. I think that the Trump administration is trying to solve the problem. They may not succeed, but I think we should appreciate that they're trying. So I cannot rate it because we don't know the outcome. So it's a question mark right now.
Thank you. Let's turn our attention to China, and I think maybe the most talked about topic right now, the tariffs. So, well, I guess it's not just China, it's about fair trade and moving the production back to the US. So, on this point, would you say he is succeeding or failing?
Well, it is a question mark right now because he's open negotiations, but he hasn't closed any deal yet. But I like to give the background, so just for an understanding of the rationale for what is happening. So various American presidents, including Hillary Clinton, Obama, etc., have talked about the problem that the trade, especially with China, is unbalanced. So I think we all know David Ricardo's theory of relative competitiveness, the enormous advantages of trade. I've written books about it myself, including, for instance, The Creative Society. It's one of the most important drivers of innovation and peace that people trade. Having said that, if trade is constructed so that one party exports stuff to the other party and then the other party doesn't export nearly enough the other way, then let's say that China exports a lot to United States. China gets a lot of money, and instead of buying American stuff for the money, they buy American assets like bonds and stocks and property and so on, and whole companies. Then in the long term, America will lose from that. And then there's a geopolitical security element. Sometimes it's being portrayed as, oh, America wants to produce Nike shoes and T-shirts and so on. And there are these funny videos made in China, which I think are funny, of these fat Americans sitting by a conveyor belt, making these shoes and so on at super slow speed. The point is that there are lots of things in the supply chains that are really critical, where if you couldn't get them from China, you would have a situation like during COVID, where it has significant economic and strategic impact. And so the not only mining, but the processing of rare minerals, the mass production of robots, lots of electronic components, etc., have been outsourced to such a degree to China that if you can't get them, it's a problem. And for instance, in a kinetic conflict with China, it would also be a huge problem. Another thing is that innovation typically happens when you have production. So if you hadn't worked with innovation in practice, you might think that, the way innovation works is somebody gets up in the morning, standing, singing in the shower, and then poof, an idea pops up in your head, and you have this amazing idea for a product, and then you raise some money or invest some money, hire some people, you make the product fantastic. But it's not like that at all. What really happens is that it's a lot of incremental ideas building upon other ideas with a lot of pivots involved. And when you produce stuff, when you're actually making stuff, that's where you get most of the ideas for innovation. So when you do intellectual innovation in the West, but then you move the physical manufacturing to China or to other nations, then more and more of the innovation actually happens where they produce. And that means that, we have seen China become incredibly innovative, which is fine. I mean, everything that goes well in China, in isolation is great for humanity, especially great for the Chinese. But it's a problem if you lose in the competitive race because you simply don't know how to make things anymore. So you want to have more innovation by getting more production, especially of the more complicated things. And then the third thing, which is a big part of his electorate mandate, is that a big part of the population have not really enjoyed the benefits of globalization the last 2 or 3 or 4 decades, because American workers especially outside the hot coastal areas, have been thrown into direct competition with Chinese workers who often sleep in work camps and work for $2 or $3 a month and so on, with horrendously long work days, very little holiday, and there's a social issue within America and within the West where these people who are kind of falling behind because of this got a bad deal, and you also want to take care of that. So those are the rationales, and then there's also a macroeconomic rationale that if you have a more balanced trade, then your counterpart stops buying all your assets, but instead they're buying your products, which is economically more sustainable. So, having said that, what he has done is I think it could have been done in another way, but I don't want to be Monday morning quarterback. Isn't that the American expression? Let's see how it goes. But he comes out with these really, really hard starting point to shock people. Then it looks like they actually made kind of a sting on China, where they said, do not retaliate. And Besson said that a lot of times. They said it numerous times in public. I think they also probably said in private, do not retaliate. I think the whole point was that they expected China to retaliate. And if they could avoid that anybody else retaliated, then there would be a moment in time where China was one place and the rest of the world was another place. And then they could say, freeze, we give the rest of the world 90 days to negotiate deals where they take down their trade hindrances against us. And then we move down from our outset. And then we get that done. And once that is done, then we turn to China. And China will be somewhat different in the way we negotiate. So it looks to me like they're in really good shape, and I'm pretty much the only one person in the world who thinks that, and I might be wrong. They have now got talks with a lot of regions and countries, and they also said the ones who get the early deals get the best deals, which is also a common negotiation practice. And I think there's a lot of things on the table here. So the tariffs is just one thing. It's very easy to well, it's not always super. Sometimes it's a bit complex, but tariffs is one thing. Then you have hidden trade obstructions, with different regulations and so on. So we cannot import American beef because blah 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 and so on. And then there can also be geopolitical and other issues involved. But I saw a table made by Bank of America where they compared the trade tariffs and technical trade obstructions from America towards its trade partners, and then from its trade partners towards America. And on that list, America had the lowest barriers, the lowest of them all. And for instance, the average tariff in the US is 7%. In other countries, it was much higher. So if we look at where they actually expect to land, we can look at what Besant has said. So he has said that he expected to get $300 to $600 billion in income from tariffs. So that's 6 to 18% of the import. So that's tariffs of 6 to 18%. The average is that, just to make it easy for us, is 12%. 12% is still below what most other nations are currently doing against the US. So I think what they're aiming at, what they're signaling, actually, if you look at also what Besant is saying, that they're aiming at having modestly higher tariffs in the US and getting other countries' tariffs quite a lot down. And whether the final result becomes lower tariffs and lower technical hindrances to trade or higher than it is now is, to me, unclear. It could be either, but it's certainly not trade wars. More like America saying we've been unfairly treated we want you to treat us better. Otherwise, we'll treat you very badly. Which to me is just like trying to reset an unfair situation. So the reason I think that China will be dealt with last is that China is also the one geopolitical adversary from the perspective of the US. I have to say that, yeah, as you said, I like to come in China. I love Chinese people. I love a lot of things about Chinese culture. I am in awe about how hard they work, how service-minded they are, how skillful they are, how honest they are in some aspects, not in all, I have to say. I said so. There's not much street crime, for instance, in China, but there might be intellectual property right issues. But it was just a matter of it's just a reality that the US and China see each other as potential strategic threats, and because of that, they want to make sure that China exports less. And the basic underlying problem in this is a big difference in how the economies are structured. So if you take private consumption in China is about 39% of GDP. Public consumption, not investment. Public consumption is 17% of GDP. You add these two up, you get 56% of GDP. So if you do the same, take in America, you take private consumption and public consumption, is close to 85%, not 56%. So, and in Europe, somewhere in between. So America has way too much consumption, too little investment. But a part of the reason for the high consumption is that they're running this horrific deficit on the fiscal account, but also the consumers are too good at consuming. China has way too much production, so it's what you call a supply side economy. And it produces much more than it consumes, and that therefore it exports so much. And it is annoying nations all over the world because, well, not all nations, but a lot of nations, they see that their companies go bankrupt because you have this super cheap exports coming out of China. And so China has had massive benefits because it has become so innovative and become dominant in so many different technologies because of this. But there's also a downside to China, which is that when you have this oversupply, you have fierce price competition all the time. And that means that if you take an amount of money, let's say $100 million, and invest into a factory, which goes straight into voracious competition, then that factory is not able to pay back the loan. So the debt is accumulating at the state level, at the regional level, at the bank level, because the banks are controlled by the government, and within many of the companies. So add all these different layers of debt up, it's about 320% of GDP. So China also, they're building up a debt problem which is not long-term sustainable. And so for China's own sake, it would actually be a good idea to have more internal consumption. They keep talking about it, it's just not happening. So it could be that this process ends up being so that the US have quite high tariffs against China, but also that some other countries, as a part of what they negotiate with the US, put up higher tariffs against China, which would force China to steer the economy somewhat more towards internal consumption. And at the same time, a consequence for the United States could be that they have somewhat more investment and somewhat less consumption. So these two extreme outliers in the world economy each move towards the center average. So you get a more balanced international situation where huge problems are not accumulating all the time. So yeah, so it's a question mark how it will end, but I will give it 10 out of 10 on the point of trying to address this problem.
Yeah, so my only comment here is in terms of the tactics he uses. So I've been negotiating pretty big deals all my life, and if I would advise somebody to use the tactics that Trump would be using, I would only advise it to people who are in a very strong negotiation position and who is willing to achieve short-term results. Because if you want long-term partners, the rhetoric like they're all kissing my ass, or also starting so aggressively instead of kind of approaching it, the friends in the EU a little bit more carefully, will of course hurt some relationships. So I think for me, the tactical approach could be a lot smoother, where you could probably get the same results. So for me, that's more a 5. But I think it's very important to address the whole balance of power and do it now if you don't want to be totally dependent on China in the future.
Yes, and I would say that I had been thinking, wouldn't this have been possible to do completely behind the curtain? So you simply approach every single nation and say, we are going to punish you unless you take down your tariffs, instead of addressing it in public towards every nation on the world at the same time. And I said earlier that this is a populist movement, and they run the whole thing like a reality show. I met a person the other day who said, nobody's watching Netflix anymore. The White House is more entertaining, but we've never seen anything quite like it. But I think it's also got something to do with his personality. He likes to be the center of attention. He likes to have a TV show before, and that makes him choose that approach. But I think the very public approach can be efficient sometimes. I'm not sure it was the right way to do this.
Let's move on to the next point, which is I guess equally controversial, because it's the whole Doge program. It's about tackling the fiscal deficit and the national debt. So how do you think that is going?
Well, first of all, I'd give them 10 out of 10 for trying, but others have tried as well. So, of course, the proof is in the pudding. I've been very disappointed by the very recent developments in Doge, because first of all, Elon Musk said he would cut 2 trillion, so that's $2,000 billion. And then he kind of backtracked to 1 trillion, which was actually what the Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, had asked him to find. But the latest report is that it's only 150 billion, so that's 15% of what he should find. And I thought, so a trillion would be more than 3% of GDP. I would think that it's possible to find that. 150 billion is not that much. So that is somewhat disappointing. So the other side of reducing the deficit is to get extraordinary income, and that is Ludwig's area. They're trying to sell golden visas. They are they want to get warrants when they give big contracts to private suppliers. So they get warrants or stock options in their company that could give some extraordinary income. There's extra income from tariffs and so on. Having said that, deficit is a bit over 6.5% of GDP. If you look at Besant's plan, it is 3.3.3 plan. It is to get the deficit down to 3%, not to 0, to have a structural long-term growth rate of 3%, and then to drill for 3 million more barrels of oil per day. I think, okay, so if you want to take it down to 3%, they're not there yet in what they have worked on, but they are getting in that direction. Okay, of course, the other side of the coin is to get the structural growth rate up. They will be helped by AI, by robots, by deregulation, and by low taxes. So I think that can work, but AI and robots will take time before it really has impact. And they also have to have really cheap, stable energy, and I think they know how to do that. So I think they're in reasonably good shape in terms of reducing the deficit, and I think it's a very positive surprise that they take this so serious, because until the very last part of the presidential candidate, neither candidate spoke about that at all. But then when Ludwig introduced Elon Musk to the team, then Elon Musk really spoke about it, and then it became a thing.
So what grade would you give them?
I'll give them 6 so far.
Okay, you actually already opened the next point, which is about energy supremacy. So achieving a lower energy price and having more energy available, and I guess not being dependent on other countries for energy.
Yes, and also being a net exporter, because to export energy is a part of soft power, just as well as exporting weapons is a part of soft power. So I think they're in very good shape there. They're liberalizing a lot. And it's not only about oil and gas, it's also about nuclear and further down the road, nuclear fusion. So I think they're doing pretty much what they can in order to get there, and I think it's realistic that they get there.
Okay, so do you think enough progress has been achieved in this area so far?
Given we're talking about the first 100 days, I think, yeah, within that time span, yes, I think so.
Okay, so what grade would you give them here?
Well, that was 7.
A 7. Okay, let's talk about deregulation. So they wanted to deregulate both within energy, but also to help American businesses in general across different sectors. I guess it's also part of the DOGE program, I suppose.
It's related to the dose program, yes. But the core, yeah, maybe you can say it is part, because dose is government efficiency. So Donald Trump has a track record because he's been president before, and he actually deregulated a lot. And I saw some incredible statistics about the impact it had compared to the corporate profits in America. So it really had a very, very big impact on corporate profits. And then it was all rolled back in the Biden administration. But we've seen he can do it, and so it's clearly not something he's just saying. He is actually capable of implementing this. I think he'll try to do quite a lot more, and I think we'll really start to see the effects on the margin of that in Q3 and Q4. So we haven't seen it all, but I would say I'm hoping for this is like an 8, something like that.
Okay, so let's just go back to China.
I
So
just want to say that as a response to what they're doing in the US, the EU came out within a few weeks and said they wanted to cut the administrative burdens of companies by 25%. UK did the same. I don't think they would have done that unless they'd seen what those were doing in the United States. So there's an element that what America does shocks the rest of the world to compete and to do the same. And you are, and I am a private business people in Europe. The amount of completely idiotic regulations that I and my team are struggling with, it's like Monty Python. And so we really, really need this done.
yeah, I agree with you there. So let's talk about China again. So part of the bigger play of the tariffs, the Ukraine war and Russia, as we talked about, is about confronting China strategically, and I would think ensuring that the U.S. stays the number one power in the world, both in soft and hard power. The question here for me is, like, is it working the way he's confronting China? Or is it actually working against the US because China will view US as a more clear adversary rather than a strategic partner?
So I don't think that the US can beat China. I don't think China can beat the US either. You and I have talked before about this big strategic study that has been done as being updated periodically by an Australian research institute for the Five Eyes military coalition, where they looked at, in the latest report, 62 different technology areas that are critical for the future. Out of these 62, 56 had China as the global leader. 4 had United States and 2 had Europe. So you cannot beat China, but you can contain China, and China would, of course, try to contain United States. So you can get a kind of stalemate between those two powers. I think that's the best American can hope for. That the other one just doesn't keep taking more and more power on the international scene. But it goes both ways.
And how would you rate the approach and success of the approach so far?
I think it's beyond rating. As I said earlier, I think China, they will deal China as the last partner, probably. We had to see how that ends. I know that the very high tariffs they have placed upon each other has become a mutual problem. First of all, there are 10 to 20 million Chinese working directly on exports to the United States. They have to find something else to do, many of them, not all, of course, because electronics is now extant. But you also got companies in China who depend on importing stuff from America, and certainly they can't get it at a reasonable price, and then they get into economic problems because of that. So they have to look for a model which is different from where it is right now.
But how about understanding Chinese culture and kind of using that understanding in their approach? It seems like it's the typical Trump approach, which is very bombastic, and China is kind of responding in kind. With your knowledge of China, do you think there's a more sophisticated way of dealing with China, or do they only understand, you could say, the kind of the strong hand?
Well, when I've been in China, I was there in September last year and in December, and I was interviewed a lot. I was in public television in China. I was sitting on different panels where I was the only non-Chinese person. I did not at any point hear anybody mention Europe. Like, it's not important. They talked about Trump and Elon Musk a lot. So they actually respect those two people. They respect their entrepreneurship, their approach, and so on. But they also think it's ridiculous how volatile Western politics is. Sometimes we Westerners, we say Chinese work according to a 100-year plan. I don't know about that. But China is like steady as you go, under the radar, building up, building up, building up. And this public spiel, public argument, and so on is a little bit, seems silly in their eyes. I spoke with a very, very senior person in the production of batteries in China. I would say one of the top 5 people. And he talked with admiration about how Elon Musk flew in. He landed in Beijing, had some meetings with the government, and flew over to the factory, got a 2-hour lessons in how to build batteries, and then said, I would like to buy 2 production lines. What does it cost and how quickly can I have them? And then he flew out the same day. And in the Chinese mind, that's like, wow, amazing. How entrepreneurial quick he is. He's talking with the people in the government. It's just buying production license, flying home the same day. So they admire these kind of things. They don't admire this, the way I don't think they admire when Donald Trump says people are kissing his ass in trade negotiations. That doesn't work very well at all. Any place, I guess, but it specifically doesn't work well at all in China. They have a sense of dignity, and they feel that they are the middle kingdom, if you will. There was used to be there was time in the past, which you and I have written about in a book, where 2/3 of the people in the world lived either in the Roman Empire or in the Chinese Empire. And in the Chinese mind, the Chinese Empire was the greatest of those two. I don't know about that. Maybe they were equal. But China's, I mean, the mindset of China is that it's like the biggest, oldest central civilization of the world, and they want to be seen as such. And if you talk with them as if they aren't, then that doesn't go down very well.
Yes, let's move on to the next point. So I guess we can't really grade this point. Like we still need to wait and see how it turns out. Like the confronting China part.
Yeah, I would say, yeah.
Okay, so the next one is how Trump has been handling the Middle East. So that would be Iran, and of course the situation with Palestine and Israel in particular.
Yeah, so I think that's actually a strong point, which is not talked much about. So first of all, during his first administration, he and his team engineered the Abraham Accords, which made a number of nations in the Middle East and Northern Africa establish diplomatic relationship with Israel. And before the incursion from Gaza into Israel, it appeared that Saudi was very close to signing that agreement as well. So they actually have a very good track record. Their focus right now is that it seems like the Middle East, I mean, I know this is a very rude way of saying it, but it's divided into, on one side, Iran, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, which are supporting terrorism and so on. And then everybody else who try to build civilized countries where you try to, the citizens can fulfill their aspirations and so on to various degrees. The key strategic risk is, of course, that Iran gets a nuclear bomb because they're supporting terrorism. And they have given them a deadline because they always want to postpone, so a hard deadline. And I think if they don't meet that deadline, which was 60 days, I honestly think Israel and America will bomb Iranian nuclear enrichment production facilities and military installations, and perhaps also oil export installations. So I think that, as far as I know, they're making good progress, but it has to be a question mark. We don't know where it lands. But it's noteworthy that the U.S. has put stealth bombers on Diego Garcia, ready to strike. And we have already seen when Iran bombed Israel and killed one person who was Arab, by the way. And then Israel, after some preparation, bombed Iran. The Israelis actually hit a very big part of the strategic defense air defense infrastructure of Iran, and had more than 100 planes in the air, and not one single plane lost. You just saw that the Western technological advantage is huge. And of course, now Iran knows that. It knows the bombers are ready. They see the bombs operating on the Houthis, which is also a way of sending a signal to Iran that, look what's happening to the Houthis. This can happen to you. And from Israel's point of view, look what happened to Hezbollah. This can happen to you. So I think there's a fair chance, but I'm not sure I would bet on percentage chance of successful negotiations. But they're giving it a try, and it gets back to the men in the arena. Sometimes we should applaud the people who try, even when they're failing.
Thank you. So can we grade it, or do we need to wait and
It's
see?
too early, I would say.
Okay, let's talk about the Panama Canal and what's going on in Latin America. So maybe a little bit of background to why the U.S. wants control of the Panama Canal. And also, it might be worth discussing that China, in many ways, are entering Latin America just as they're entering Africa. So there's, again, a geopolitical play here to talk about.
Yeah, so the two ports at each end of the Panama Canal are Chinese-owned. There's a deal. I don't know the stage of that deal, actually, whether it's a letter of intent or executed pending government permission, but to sell it to a consortium led by BlackRock or organized by BlackRock. But it's right now the Chinese government is reviewing it. So it's not really done. I think the US is so powerful vis-a-vis Panama that some way or the other, they will get what they want, which is strategic certainty that the canal is under control. Also in the case of a kinetic crisis. So I think that's getting solved. I have a theory that nobody else agrees with, so it's probably wrong, but that they might also have on the table to offer Panama a arrangement similar to Puerto Rico, where it's an associated American territory. Also because then they could seal the southern border of Panama, which is when people come from South America, they march off through Panama and then through Mexico and to the US. I don't know, but I think they can get what they want some way, somehow, and they're probably well on their way to do it.
Okay, can we grade this, or is it too early?
Too early, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to something really controversial, at least when you look at it with Danish eyes. Greenland and the Arctic strategic presence. And I also wanted your evaluation on how much is this about Trump actually wanting to expand the U.S. territory, to say that he's making the U.S. bigger, and how much is it actually about strategic presence? Because it doesn't seem that Denmark has been denying Greenland access to, or denying the U.S. access to Greenland in terms of safety and military bases. It has more been the U.S. actually closing down bases, if I'm informed correctly.
Yeah, that's correct. After World War II, there were many U.S. bases in Greenland, and they closed down, on their own initiative. The U.S. have been closing down one after another, and there are only 200 Americans left on Greenland. If they wanted 10,000, they could have 10,000. So the military argument is really, really weak. So I think it's a combination of two things. First of all, well, maybe more than two things, but let's start with the simplest, which is mining rights. So there's this case of an Australian company, by the way, with Chinese investors, who wanted to mine uranium in Greenland. They invest money in it. at Cranefjell, I think it is, and then the local government says, "Nah, we don't want anybody to mine uranium in Greenland." So, considering how enormous Greenland is, I should think if you should mine any place in the world, it's difficult to find a place where you do least damage than in less damage than in Greenland. But it just means you have all these resources, and you never know when you can mine it, because the local government can say yes one day, and then they can just say, by the way, no, the next day. And so if the United States had control over these resources, then it would be American regulations that would apply, and then it would mean that you could trust that you could mine it. And to some degree, if you have control over access to a number of resources, including rare earth minerals and others, it doesn't really matter if you're mining them right now. That's the mere fact that everybody in the geopolitical chess game knows that you also have these resources, will make you appear more powerful. I mean, incrementally more powerful than you already are. But I think there's also a possibility of making commercial harbor, perhaps, and also if the U.S. wants to, and this goes actually back to the military argument, that if you want to make more elaborate combined military and commercial installations, like a dual-use harbor, commercial and military, with a road system connecting to mines, but where there's also a military presence, then you need to know that nobody will come and say, hey, get out. So there's this strategic certainty. And so you and I, we have been fantasizing actually jointly about a deal that we think could be improve the conditions for everybody, which would be to sell, that Denmark sells the part of Greenland that nobody lives in to the United States. And then Denmark and the Inuits in Greenland get a load of money. And then America gets what it is interested in. So that is a possibility. We don't know if there are any secret talks, but the fact that Donald Trump is not really talking about it could be because the trade now is taking all his attention, but it could also be that there are actually some secret talks. I don't know. I kind of doubt it. But the last thing is that he is a property guy. And, at some point, the property guys, they want to build the tallest skyscraper in the city where they operate, wherever. So they have egos. And for him, if he could expand the U.S. territory with 20%, which is what Greenland, or 85% of Greenland roughly would be, then he would be seen, and at least see himself as one of the greatest presidents ever. And we should remember that a substantial part of America has been bought. There was the so-called Louisiana sale, where they bought the whole central third of America from Napoleon. They bought Alaska from Russia. They bought the Virgin Islands from none other than Denmark, actually. So, yeah, there's a precedence. They have good experience with buying land from other nations. So why not try again? The way he said it really doesn't work very well in Denmark, and I think it's one of those things also where he should never have said that. If they wanted to discuss this with Denmark, they should have started with a number of soft dinners at the American embassy in Denmark. And then said, can we work something out? We're interested in this. We'll give you this. You get something. They get something. We get something. We swap around. And then once we have what we think is a good deal, then of course we understand you have to put it to a public referendum, because you cannot do such a deal without a consensus from your population. That's the way to do it. And if the people were against it, nothing would happen. But I actually think there's a deal that the Danes and the Inuits would vote for. That is possible. So let's see what happens there.
Yeah, I would say tactically, it's probably not a very high grade, because he's been talking about invasion and things that will probably put both the Danish government and the Inuit government off.
I think tactically, I don't know if is our scale from 1 to 10 or 0 to 10.
The 0 to 10.
Okay, I give it 0.
Now we'll use the whole scale at least.
Yeah.
So another interesting one here is his wishes to roll back, you would say, the woke culture and DEI. So DEI has mostly been used in companies for hiring, for example, and it has
And in the
meant
public sector also.
and it has meant that you would make sure that you would get a diverse pool of people in the company over actually hiring the most qualified all the time. And this is part of what is being rolled back. And I think especially we've seen it with some of the big tech companies. Meta has rolled it back very quickly. I think Google and Amazon have followed. Apple are still quiet as far as I know, but a lot of other big companies has already rolled DEI back. So I think, I mean, I've been pretty surprised at how quickly and effectively this has been done, and potentially there's also quite a big backing for it in the population in the US. What about you? How do you see this?
Yeah. So again, DEI was not popular, not widely popular in American population. So also a lot of Democrats were against it. The Western civilization is built partly on meritocracy, the fact that it doesn't matter, your sex, your color, your background, your family name, you should be rewarded by what you do, what you're capable of doing, your ethics and quality of your work. So DEI goes directly against that and can be interpreted as racism or sexism because it discriminates. And so in practice, for instance, in universities, when they apply it, it means that they discriminate actively against Jews, Asians, and whites, and actually against men. So all these companies, and there's many more companies also, for instance, Lego in Denmark, seem to have scaled back radically quickly. Lots of these companies, their management did not agree with it, but they implemented it because they felt a social pressure to do so. And now, when they felt it was legitimate to undo it, they undid it really, really quickly. But it's now, for instance, the US has communicated to a number of large European companies that if they have DEI practices, they cannot export to the US government. And which put them in some kind of a bind because the EU have some DEU regulations that kind of put pressure for them to do it. So what shall they do in this situation? But I think so. I happen to be, that's my political point of view. I am in the camp where I think it's a terrible policy and it's actually hurting the people it wants to benefit, and it hurts pretty much everybody. So I'm personally happy with it, but I also think they have succeeded very much to a very high degree. So I'd give it an 8, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think it has gone pretty well. And by the way, you are right. It is equity. I had just seen a couple of instances where it was used as equality, but it amounts to pretty much the same thing. I think the big misunderstanding is that DEI is not about equal access to jobs. It's about equal result. So
Yeah.
that you actually you need to diversify the higher pool of people.
Yeah, I follow a podcast called All In, very entertaining. It includes the aforementioned David Sachs, by the way, who is now in the Trump administration. But one of them, he told about, he had a friend, he is world level, top level internationally expert in one element of monetary policy. He sits in a university, has a PhD in this subject. There was a job in the Federal Reserve, so the central bank of the US, working on this. He applies for the job, gets interviewed, by top management, and he's coming to what seems to be the final interview. And then the interviewer says, it's very important that you stress your Indianness. So he is of Indian birth or Indian ethnicity. And I said, what? So he's objectively super qualified, but they want him to stress that he's a man of color to get this job, which makes him decide not that he doesn't want to work in the Fed because they discriminate. Even they discriminate to his benefit. He doesn't want to work in an organization that discriminates on the basis of color. So I think it's great that they're addressing this, and I think they've done a lot of progress very quickly.
Yeah, and I have seen this a lot. I worked a lot in Silicon Valley and with the big tech companies, and the minorities do not like the DEI policies as well. They really hate the idea that they could have been hired for a job because they fell into one of the minority groups. Okay, let's move on to, I think this is one of the quotes from Elon Musk, that it's important that we will have democracy instead of bureaucracy, and how that has been addressed. Maybe you can explain first what he actually meant by that.
Yes, it's this phenomenon that we also have in Europe and I guess many other places, and that is you have democracy, and the idea is that people vote to get the government to implement whatever they want implemented. However, in the reality, a whole lot of things are decided by judges and by anonymous bureaucrats who make regulations, for instance, and activist judges who have political views and try to rule in a way that's kind of bent the society away from what democratically elected politicians wants to do. And especially Elon Musk has been spearheading this movement, which is about taking power away from the bureaucracy and back to the democracy. So if you take in the EU, you and I are Danish nationals. In Denmark, probably quite a lot more than half of all regulations that are made in Denmark have actually been decided in the EU, but are then has to be voted through, ratified by the Danish parliament. So you have all these regulations that come from EU that many of them, the Danish population are absolutely against, that they would not stand any chance of getting voted through in the Danish parliament. But they come from the EU and also international regulations like the human rights regulation, which prevents Denmark from throwing out criminal immigrants, something that vast majority of the Danes are against. It was something that was signed by people who are now dead, but it's still so the country is partly being ruled by something that nobody really agrees with anymore. And so this is a riot against this. And I think it can become a part of an international movement. For instance, just a few days ago, one political party in Denmark said that Denmark should ignore the Human Rights Convention in as much as when it prevents them from expelling criminal immigrants. So I think this will spread, and I think they're making some progress, but it's early days. It's a very big task. I'd give it a 6.
Okay. On to revamping NATO and global military commitment. So I guess this would include kind of pressuring the other NATO countries to spend more on their military.
Yeah, that's right. So there's a number that's being tossed around is that everybody should spend 5% of GDP. I don't think that's meant serious. I think 3.5% is kind of the unofficial consensus number that everybody should get up to. There are a few nations that are there or close to there, like Poland. America is higher. So what the US is aiming for is that the US can take its commitment down somewhat and then get the other countries to take their commitment up. And this has been discussed for decades, of course, and from time to time European nations have said, yes, we'll do that. No, you can trust us. And then they don't do it. And this is why the Trump administration is using stock therapy now and say, we are not sure we'll defend you actually, if you're not paying the bill. So this is probably an example where the very rough rhetoric that Donald Trump likes to use works very efficiently. So whereas it's very inefficient in terms of how he is addressing Greenland, I think it's very efficient in terms of how he's addressing NATO. So NATO is getting strengthened. So there's another thing is that because of the robot, drone, AI revolutions, the whole military hardware situation or weapons situation has to be recalibrated. But the big political issue right now is the more even distribution of the cost, and especially that the Europe spends more. And I think they're making good headway, so I'll give them a 7 on that.
Yeah, I 100% agree that this is one of the few instances where I agree with the rhetoric, also because of the history of Europe not really living up to their commitments here.
Yeah, they keep saying, yeah, we'll do it, and then they don't do it.
Exactly, and it seems this time that they actually will. So whether it was very smart kind of to threaten that they will not live up to their NATO commitments, I don't know if that is the right wording, but a bold statement to the other NATO countries definitely makes sense. Then let's move on to technology and censorship battle. So I think this is twofold. So one is actually making sure that changing the censorship situations within the social media platforms. I think that we can take this one very quickly. I mean, this is happening. Meta are changing their rules, censoring a lot less. X, with the leadership of Musk, already did that. So I think that part is happening. The other part, and I think, that part we could probably give an 8 or 9. But there's another part of the technology policy that we should discuss, and that is the issues that the US have with the EU, because the EU has actually been tripping up US tech companies quite a lot. A lot of the new tools and features of tech companies such as Google, Meta, but especially OpenAI has been stopped by the EU. Or it's not stopped by the EU, but EU regulation is so complex that, for example, OpenAI and Google have to wait with rolling out their products or even revamp their products. So I think Vance have been quite aggressive here in his tone, but I'm not so sure if anything is really happening in terms of deregulation in the EU on this. Do you know?
I'm not aware of any progress. Of course, I heard Vance's speak in Ramstein, and I was thinking that, in my opinion, he was right about all these things, but you could have said the same about the US a few months before. So we should also remember that US has just changed some of the policies that they are now blaming the EU for pursuing. Or the US government. I mean, it's a part of the US. Part of it is US government. Part of it is, for instance, what happened with Twitter, which became X. I don't think there's a turnaround, but it's probably on the table because, as I said earlier, the tariff discussions are not only about tariffs. It's about also all these technical restrictions and the fact that Europe keeps, first of all, obstructing the rollout of American tech companies and then giving massive fines to American tech companies is obviously an irritant to the US, and I'm sure they're including that in what they're negotiating.
Yeah, I mean, my own opinion here is that they should shift the focus away from these fines and this is also GDPR regulation that stops a lot of these rollouts to actually getting I would call it a world policy in place for AI development, also involving China. Really, I think that's a more important focus. Just safeguarding what could go wrong, and here I'm not talking about sentient AI. I'm simply talking about kind of the misuse of bad actors and how maybe terrorist states could use AI as a bad actor.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't think the rhetoric was great. But I think they need to address this. I'm at about a 5 on this.
Yeah, so part of what Vance said was also that, especially in the UK, you can get in prison for saying things that a big part of the population actually agree with.
Yes, and I don't know. I guess that will be rolled back as part of rolling back the Vogue initiatives generally, but I don't know if any progress has been made so far.
Yeah, so it's not directly about wokeness. It's about freedom of expression.
Yeah, we'll see what's going to happen there. I think there's quite a big majority in most countries in the EU to roll some of this back and have more freedom of speech.
And then, of course, the EU can say, hey, in America, you are deporting students for demonstrating for Hamas or Palestine. What are you talking about? I think that's another matter, but there's not black and white. There are lots of elements in it.
No, definitely. So our last point is election integrity measures. So tightening voting laws, for example.
Yeah. So what the Trump administration says is it's mainly about voter ID. That a number of states don't require voter ID, and then they have proved that illegal immigrants have been voting because of a step-by-step process where they end up getting to the point where they actually are invited to vote, even though it's against the Constitution. I don't know how big the problem is, but they point out that the states that require no voter ID all vote Democrat without exception, and they think that's like. So, to me, it's not a major point. Maybe I'm misjudging this, but I'm sure they can vote through a change of the regulations to stop these loopholes.
Yes, I'm not really able to grade this one. Do you have any idea?
I think it's a question mark because they haven't really solved it yet. I mean, it's not relevant before the next election, so they have time.
Okay, so now we have kind of given Trump all these grades from 0 to 10. So the question is, so what is his overall grade? Maybe we should use the American grading system for this, going from, I think it's A+ to a F. What should he get in his school report for the first 100 years? 100 days.
Yeah, it feels like 100 years. I prefer not to give it an overall grade, but say that, so I work in a startup business. I'm co-founder of venture capital fund. I've founded or co-founded 13 companies myself. And I know when you look at a early stage of a startup company, sometimes it looks like the idea is really bad. I mean, you will never succeed. In other cases, ideas is great, but I'm not sure you can execute on. I think many of the ideas are great. It's things that has big backing in the population. It's also many of the ideas is actually something that Democrats presidents have been arguing for also. The way they execute on it is highly unusual, highly unusual. So I would say I'm mostly optimistic. But most of all, there are a couple of major risks I'm aware of. First of all, there's a midterm election coming up in 26. And so they don't have very long time to get these things to produce positive results. Otherwise, they lose their majority in the House. And right now, Donald Trump is exceptionally unpopular in polls, but the Democrats are even more unpopular. So he needs to be more popular than the Democrats when that happens. The second thing is that concerning tariffs, there is some risk that if he is too unreliable and too brutal and has showed too much lack of respect, some of these nations actually change side and say, no, we'll partner with China. And then you can kiss our ass. So, you know, we all know the expression of overplaying your cards. I think he has drawn cards. Sometimes he gets pretty close to overplaying them, I think.
Yeah, I think so. You're not willing to give a grade, so maybe I should do it. I think we are somewhere in the middle, and I think so I'm thinking like, C, maybe on a good day B minus. I mean, we'll kind of see where it ends, but I also think this grade reflects that it's a lot more nuanced than what we're seeing in the papers, because I think if you ask public or not public media but state-funded media and some of the big newspapers in Europe, it would probably be an F, which I don't think would be reflective of what is going on. And if you are asking a Trumpist, it would probably be an A+. But I think it is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, so if I can conclude with a remark from my point of view, I think a lot of what we see is so opinionated and so emotional and so low dimensional that it's useless. So you have Donald Trump at the top of the administration. He is a salesman with a very special personality. He always exaggerates when he says what he will achieve. He also, when he starts in a negotiation, he starts in a very extreme corner, like here. The other parts are here, and then he expects that you will meet somewhere around the middle. But people, they think, okay, we're here, and he came out there. And then they think that, it will only be where he said, instead of that they will move to the middle. They are only looking at potential first order of effects of the wrong things that he said. They're not looking at second order effects, third order effects. They're not looking at what the very competent people lower in his team are actually saying and doing. And they're not trying to understand the strategy behind the whole thing. So I think the strategy is in many ways really smart and it's really necessary. Many, not all, but many in his team are incredibly smart. And just to freak out over what he says is of no use. I can't use it for anything.
Agreed. Thank you for coming once again, Lars. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.